Hello again, this is Austin Bauk at FurFarmandFork.com doing another Excelling at Food Safety. In this video we're going to be talking about building logs and trending tools, and we're going to build a complaint management system. So for a little background and some of the tricks we're going to be using in this particular video, you may want to revisit the previous two videos, Basic Principles, File Housekeeping and Database Building, and Let's Make an Index. We're going to be using the tools we showed off in those videos, but we are also going to be introducing some new ones to build logs. So this video series exists because people say my company runs off a spreadsheet, and what they're really saying is that my company doesn't manage information well. It's not a frustration with using Excel for things, but it's a frustration that I'm not able to get what I need, I'm not able to analyze the information I need, this feels unprofessional. Getting a software solution doesn't change management style, it doesn't change how available information is, because you get out of the software system what you put into it, and you can spend thousands of dollars on a piece of software, populate it with poor data, and have the exact same problems you would with Excel. So prerequisites, especially in this video for making useful and powerful Excel tools, we're going to need to make sure we have controlled file names and locations. We're going to use some barrier security, nothing crazy, but just enough to make sure that people don't break the sheets that we create. And we're going to design our spreadsheets as databases, not matrices or charts. So let's get into it, logs and trending tools. So what sorts of logs am I talking about? Today we're going to be building a complaint management record. So your company receives complaints about the products it receives. Generally, anybody who comes to your facility for any reason is going to say, hey, do you get complaints? What do they look like? How does that look? And a lot of times your facility, when it receives a complaint, doesn't receive an actionable complaint, but you're going to collect that data and use it to drive changes in your quality management system to fix those problems. Products on hold tend to be a log. A lot of times we have logged out, oh, hey, this is on hold, pending QA review, whatnot. A lot of times we have a register of index making sure we got those. You can use these for production output. Doesn't scale well with really big facilities or complex lines, but certainly if you were like a small coffee creamer company or something like that with just a few SKUs and a small footprint facility, very few people, you could use this as kind of a traceability exercise, and you could be logging each day's production with data you might want to analyze later. Product release is another one, and that includes raw materials. So a lot of times we have a log that says, oh, this material was received, someone reviewed the COA and inspected or did micro testing and released that lot of raw materials. That's an example. Pest management records, you could have a log for every inspection done or every treatment given like this. And inspection findings, certainly we could have a log with all of our internal audit findings. Basically, anything we want to keep records of and investigate trends are going to use this log type format. As you can see, our analysis of complaints that the hot sauce was so spicy it caused injury could be relevant to other details in our plant, such as when we lost thumbtacks. So that's the real advantage of these databases outside of compliance. So the log we're going to talk about today is going to combine two pieces of data entry. It's going to have some sort of formal record of the event that happens when it happens, and just like we talked about with all those examples, they generally have some sort of piece of paper that gets generated to say, hey, this happened, here's who did it, etc. And then we're going to have the actual database that we're going to use for trending and analysis of these records. So let's go ahead and hop into it. If I take a look at the complaint record that I've created, at FurFarmandFork.com, I'm collecting customer complaints about whatever widgets I may be selling or whatever products I may be selling. And so all the folks in my organization responsible for responding to customer complaints about product quality, so not really sales-oriented complaints, right? We're not going to, in this video talking about food safety, we're not going to track things like delivery failures or out of stocks, but we're going to really track things that are about the quality of the product. So, I'm going to get some general contact info for who reached out to us. The product itself is important, and any lot or traceability information that I happen to use in my facility. The nature of the complaint, so when they got a hold of us and how, who talked to them, kind of what category it may have fallen into. Was it foreign material? Was it some sort of biological contamination issue? A packaging failure, flavor, smell, or taste, or maybe they call this with a preference. Like we may have made a formula change and we want to track those complaints. And hey, we just changed berry flavor suppliers on our yogurt and we suddenly got a whole bunch of complaints about, your strawberry used to taste like strawberry, now it tastes like soda. Maybe that could be something that we'd log. We'll get the relevant details, we'll document our response or investigation that we did in response, and we'll have someone close this. And this would be like an SQF compliant complaint record. So using this record, I have, potentially a file cabinet full of these things, and if I wanted to say, hey, how are my complaints for foreign material doing? I'm a nut and trail mix supplier, and we may have had some issues with some like rocks and twigs making it through our nutshells. How can I look at how we've been doing on that as a trend? And certainly these forms sitting in a file cabinet by themselves aren't very helpful, and every time we want to ask a question like that, to go into that cabinet and have someone literally count them up and try to look is going to be inaccurate and a huge time sink. So we're going to want to create a database for this information. So let's go ahead and do so. I'm going to scooch this guy out of the way here, and we'll go ahead and pop open our new complaint management system. Huzzah! So we have nothing here. Looking back at our complaint form, as in any sort of log, we're going to typically want to provide some sort of identification number so we can reference it. Not in all logs, but certainly for complaints. If I subsequently have plan improvements planned that I'm using as part of my preventive actions and things like that, or if I'm going to subsequently have additional incidents and things like that tied to this complaint, some sort of unique identifier is going to be helpful. So I'm just going to call my first column in my database complaint number or something of that nature. And then, so basically, we've started our database here. So let's go ahead and I'm going to create a numbering system. My company, my small coffee creamer or nut mix company receives 1 or 2 complaints a month, maybe. So I'm never going to go over 1,000, so I like numbering systems that provide information rather than being random numbers. So I'm going to go ahead and preface my complaint number with 20 and just make it a numerical step up after that, and we'll use 3 digits because it's extremely unlikely that my organization is going to have more than 1,000 complaints in a year. So in 2021, I'd start prefacing all these with 21, and that way if I'm looking through my records, I know what year that complaint happened. So I'll go ahead. The other nice thing about that system is I can use the fill button, so go ahead and go to the corner of the cell and get that little cross going, and we'll drag that down and I can populate some future complaint numbers. Let's go ahead and think of some more information we're going to want to record based on our complaint form. The name of the customer, certainly if I'm talking about consumers, this isn't really something that I'm going to want to trend, but if I am an ingredient manufacturer and I'm thinking about other manufacturers as customers who may complain more than once or more often, that could be useful information to me. If I was a plastic bottle supplier and I had 3 or 4 companies that put their products in my bottles, it may be helpful to do that. So let's go ahead and identify the customer. Next is going to be, we're going to want to know what day the complaint happened, right? We're probably going to want to know what product it involved. And we're going to want to know maybe some lot information, so that way we can see if there's any problems with a particular day. And, let's go ahead and say that we definitely want to know at a glance if we had any complaints that were threats of illness. So we're just going to make a comment in these complaints to make sure that if this is something that is suggestive of contaminated product or an outbreak or an injury of some kind, that we can rapidly find those and know that we're addressing those more severely than, say, a flavor complaint, right? The other last one I'm going to throw on here right now is kind of a category of complaints, and you can see that on my form I identified some categories, and that's really just going to help us with trending and analysis down the road. So let's go ahead and leave it there. Maybe I'm going to add a detail column just in case I want to give myself some notes, but I already have that information recorded on this form, so it doesn't necessarily need to be duplicated. So now I've created a database, so we're going to go ahead and select those cells. We're going to format this sucker as tables, so Excel is going to go ahead and make those named domains and things like that and be a little smarter about the way we do things. and we'll just pick a table concept that we really like. How about a nice calming green, since we're talking about complaints, generally not a great thing, right? Awesome. So now I've created a simple database, and if I go ahead and populate some complaints here, let's go ahead and just make up some names. Bob, Jim, Sue, Janice, Marty, Doc. Okay. And who knows, maybe these guys complained a few times. Oopsie daisy. That'll work. Oh my goodness. Look at that. Now we're getting a nice mixture of these names. Marty, why are you complaining so much? And then dates, you know, I'm just going to go ahead and we'll say that these kind of all occurred once a day in January. Use my fill tool to cheat a little bit here. Beautiful. Let's come up with some products. Let's say trail mix, yogurt. I'm going to spell one wrong here so we can talk about that later. And trail mix, trail, tea mix, nut mix, and let's go ahead and populate out some complaints there. Awesome. And we won't worry about lot numbers right now. Let's go ahead and just make one of those an illness and say no to the rest. And we won't worry, we'll do this. And like I said, that detail column's just there just in case we might find it useful to say, you know, hey, found screw, things like that, that as we look at the database, we can look at a glance. So already, just like we talked about in the episode 2 of excelling at food safety, this database has given us a lot of tools, right? I can immediately kind of look at things by category and see what's going on in terms of that specific category. I can immediately sort by product and things like that. So that's all fantastic. The next piece that's going to be helpful for us is making pivots out of this complaint database, right? So if I go ahead and select my database again, go to Insert on the ribbon, we'll do a pivot table and pivot chart. Go ahead and rename this sheet pivot so we know where we're at. And now really, really easy for me to go ahead and throw a date on there, and you know, let's just do a count of date received. Hey, look, we received 1 complaint per day. I can start grouping this by month. Of course, I only have January in there, so that's only so helpful. You know, I can go ahead and say, hey, let's throw a product on the columns, and let's see in January of this year, you know, what products were contributing to our complaints, or what category our complaints apply to. All this information super helpful for you to analyze your complaints and see where you need to make changes, and obviously amazing to show off in an audit to say, oh yeah, my chief reason for complaints is, you know, physical contamination, but you can see that if I go ahead and sort out by physical contamination, so we're going to go ahead and throw that into the filters. Only show me physical contamination complaints. We've only had 5. Show me, let's ungroup that. And, you know, we received a few in January, and certainly it seems like they're coming in a steady pace, so we haven't had any changes. And so this would give us all of our trending for any individual complaint we care about. Like we talked about before, we can do this with customer and all of that good stuff. So already this is an amazing database. But we really haven't done anything here that we didn't do in the last episode. And like I mentioned, this log that we've created is unique because this isn't where we're logging the information, right? I tap the stuff in so that I can do analysis, but all the details have been captured on this complaint form, and it's sitting in a file cabinet somewhere. So if I want the details and I'm doing an analysis on here, and maybe I, short out for, I want to just look at complaints where there was potential for illness, and I want to do a deep dive on these because I have some concerning trends. I then got to go over to that file cabinet and dig through and find complaint 20-001 and figure out what went on there and things like that. We can do that in this database, and that's mostly what we're going to talk about here. Another comment before we hop into that is that when we were looking at our trends, and we were looking at trends by category, you can see how I have, not by category, but by product. So let's ditch our category and let's look at our product. I've got these misspelled ones, and so the issue there is that if I'm looking at products, let's group this back up so we can see it all together. I have a category for tmix and a category for trail mix because the folks doing data entry in my database were inconsistent in their naming. So I've got hidden stuff here. That bar should actually be taller. Same thing with our yogurt. We have actually another peak for yogurt here that we didn't identify. So you can say, hey, everybody, make sure we type this in the same way every time, but we have a better tool for that. So let's go ahead and make a new sheet, and this sheet will end up showing up on all of your databases, and we're going to call it data validation. And here's where we're going to create what we want people to actually type into our database. So I'm going to go ahead and identify one for products, and we're going to say, all right, we can do trail mix, yogurt, what did I say, trail mix, yogurt, and nut mix. Sure. So we've identified these guys as our products. I'm going to make this a table because once again I want it to be named. So we'll make that a pretty table. Yes, I put a header on there. Boom. So let's hop back over in our table here. And if you have a made database, this would be more difficult because you'd have to go in there and clean up your data. But we're going to pretend that this is a brand new database and I want to set this up right. So I'm going to go ahead and select my product section here. I'm going to go to data on the ribbon, and I'm going to choose data validation. That's under data tools here in the center river. And here I'm going to, instead of allowing people to type in anything, I'm going to say, hey, I want you to type from a list specifically. And the source for that list, if I go ahead and identify it, hop back over to my data validation sheet, select my products. Now let's just do that. OK. Hit OK. Now when I go to product, I can't type in just whatever I want. If I do tmix, this value does not match the data validation restrictions that have been defined. Mwahaha. So instead, as an employee, I received a new complaint today. This is 20-020. The customer was Bob. It happened to 120. When I get to product on my database here, I'm going to have to choose one of these. And the genius of that is that when we choose these, they are always going to be spelled exactly the same, and all of our pivots and our sorting on here isn't going to have a bunch of extra categories for everyone's version of their name of that product. Maybe they call your tomato soup, the brand name Tom's Soup versus tomato soup, and you end up with 4 different versions of the same product. So data validation is going to be really important when this gets big, and especially when you have multiple people making entries, because that's going to make sure that we have data integrity when they enter. And that's the exact same thing that those third-party software solutions do. They build in those tools so that you select your product from a list and it doesn't rely on somebody typing things in. So again, that was make a sheet with data validation and make a table for every cell in which you want to put data in. And certainly on the date section, we can go to data validation and we can say, hey, only allow people to put in a date. And that way they won't be able to put in kind of gibberish cells that won't be counted if you're sorting things out by date. And alternatively, you can say, hey, don't put out any dates older than on January 1st. I'll say, hey, don't let anybody enter anything in that says it's from 2019. They might do it out of habit, and it's going to be wrong because they're not used to writing 2020 yet. So we're just going to make it so the data validation doesn't allow that to happen, and that'll help increase the integrity of your sheet, make it more useful. So that's data validation. So that's a new concept we're talking about. So the next one we were getting to was that we wanted to tie together this complaint record with our entry in the database. So this is the first time in our Excelling at Food Safety series that we are going to use a macro. Now, I have rules about these. We do not have active macros in worksheets. Reasoning for that is eventually we're going to move on from our position, or multiple people are going to be involved, and that knowledge is so rare that our spreadsheet's going to break and no one's going to know how to fix it. We'll have to start over. The other piece is that when you're working in a business with enterprise software and IT and things like that, Windows and other security measures to keep software secure in the business environment really don't like macros. And so either your IT department's going to say, I don't know that we're going to have those, it's a vulnerability and it's probably not worth it. Or alternatively, you're going to have another user open up your database and they're going to have to click OK through like 5 or 6 various warnings saying, hey, this workbook uses macros, should you enable? Hey, we've identified this as dangerous. And we don't want employees to become deaf to those warnings, and we also don't want them to freak out when they show up. So in general, when we're building these Excel tools, we want to avoid macros. The exception is that we have a couple macro tools that are used once and then turned back off. So we will not save this as a macro-enabled spreadsheet. It will still be a regular spreadsheet without macros, but we will run a macro just one time to take advantage of a tool. And that tool is folder creation. So if you could imagine, instead of a filing cabinet, what if in my complaint management folder I had a file for each of these complaints and I could link to those files like we talked about in our last Make an Index? That'd be awesome, but I really don't want to have to make a brand new file every time I create a complaint. That seems really cumbersome. I totally agree. Here's the deal. We have a complaint numbering system. So let's pretend it was January 1st, 2020. It is time for a new year. Awesome. I'm going to start with complaint 20001. And let's just say, hey, last year I got 300 complaints. Let's assume I'm going to get, at least 400 or 500, right? So let's go take my fill tool and drag it down. Look at that. To 941. Hopefully we don't get that many more complaints than last year, but we pre-populated those so that we can go ahead and put the data in. Now, this is important. I'm going to go ahead and select these, and we're going to use a macro to generate folders with this name so we can link to those. So to use macros, you need to get access to the Developer tab on your ribbon, and it's not there by default in Excel. So if we right-click anywhere on the ribbon and we say Customize the ribbon, you can see that we have main tabs, and they're all going to be selected except for this Developer tab. So if I take it off and hit OK, this is what everyone's used to seeing, but that Developer tab doesn't exist. So I'll right-click, Customize the ribbon, check Developer, OK, and now that Developer tool is up here. So we're going to go ahead and go to Developer and open up Visual Basic. Woo! Alright, don't freak out. We're going to do very few clicks in this environment. We're not going to do anything crazy. So, keep in mind, we selected the cells that we want to name after these folders. I'm going to go ahead and double click on Sheet 1 over here on the project. And you guys are going to copy and paste this macro. And I'll make this available below the blog post, and I'll make this available below the YouTube video if YouTube doesn't stop me from doing so. So this guy can be, I'll leave this with the video. It's a simple macro, and what this macro is going to do is it's going to say, hey, the cells that you selected, I'm going to make folders named after those cells in the same folder that the worksheet is saved in. So if I look at where I've saved this worksheet, right? Oops, sorry. Of course, I can't see it. So I've saved this in Computer A, Dropbox, Documents, Blog Posts, Excel, Videos, Complaint Management. This is where it's going to make these folders. So I've selected my cells that I want them after the folders. I've opened up Sheet 1 here. I've pasted my macro in. And now I'm going to go up to this little play sign. It says Run Sub User Form. and I'm going to run it. Depending on how many folders I asked it to create, that could take a few minutes or a few seconds. I had it create some 900 folders, and it did it in only a few seconds. Different depending on what sort of computer setup you're on, things like that. Basically run it and then leave it alone. Awesome. I'm going to go ahead and close this guy. Close this guy. We have no active macros on this worksheet. Nothing has changed. But, all right, go back to the top. If I go ahead and go back to that complaint management folder, boom, all of those folders now exist. They all got nothing in them, right? But they exist. So now let's pretend that I am wanting access to those. We're going to go back to the tools. We're going to create a open folder or link or some other column. And we're going to use that hyperlink formula. So equals hyperlink. Our location, just like we did before, right? We're going to go ahead and, oh goodness gracious. Complaint management. Here we go. So this is the file path that I'm going to be going to get to the folder, right? We're going to put that in quotes because it's text. We're going to concatenate, right, like we talked about. Oops. Put my other slash in there, end quotes. Concatenate using the ampersand. All of these folders were named after the complaint numbers. So I'm just going to go ahead and select my complaint number for that row. All done there. The friendly name, let's just make that the complaint number as well. I'll select that cell one more time. Close our parentheses. So our link is just listing the complaint number, and if we can imagine that this gets really wide, that'd be helpful to us. And then if I go ahead and click on that folder, awesome. I'm in a complaint management and the folder dedicated to that complaint. This dedicated folder is really helpful. Not only am I going to save this record, whether it's one that I do by hand and scan, or it's one that I'm going to just do exclusively in Word and save it to that folder, but now I'm obviously going to put that record in it. And then I could also start putting in other supporting documentation. Maybe I had a project and a detailed investigation and corrective action I'll put in here. Maybe I just had pictures of the product. You know, the customer called me up and said, hey, found a screw. And they sent me a picture of the product lot information and the screw they found inside the nut mix. Awesome. I can put those in this complaint folder. Now when I'm going through and I'm investigating my complaints, I can say, hey, show me all the complaints with illness, and then I have all the details that I originally recorded on my form. And then really this detail column becomes, you know, really minimal. All the details were recorded at the time of the complaint. Maybe I just want to put some notes in here for myself. The other big thing we can do with complaints is continuing to hammer down these categories. So we identified specific products, but if you imagine that you had, you know, 200 SKUs because of my strawberry yogurt, I sell a single serve, and I sell a quart pack, and maybe a huge like 1 gallon yogurt bucket that I sell to institutions. That'd be all helpful, but I'd have to, when I wanted to use my pivot to break down those products, I'd have to break them down by category. So instead I might create another column in here that says, okay, flavor, because regardless of the packaging type, if I get a bunch of complaints on how my strawberry flavored yogurt tastes, I'm going to want to be able to trend that by the type of product it is, not necessarily by the unique SKU, which included like my 12 pack versus my 24 pack, right? So that's really helpful. But overall, this becomes an extremely powerful way to look at our customer complaints, analyze them, and have access to all of the original records within one click. And this will work the same for anything else. If this was a pest control log, I'd have, you know, the pest control information I was interested in trending, maybe how many mice were found in the traps and things like that. And then I could actually open up the pest control report that was recorded for that day. If it was audits, I could open up the form that those people filled out. If it was every day's production, I could have my production record saved every day, and just a brief note of like how much I made per SKU, how many staff members were there, how long it took, and you could start doing things like OEE trending and things like that. So that's our complaint management database, and this is the same system that we can use elsewhere. So if you'd like me to make a system for your company, maybe you're like, I'd love to learn more about how to break down those product categories or tie this into my HACCP plan so it picked a specific process flow for a category of products, and we can continue to make this as detailed as it needs to be for your particular company. You can reach out to me at furfarmandfork.com by clicking on the consulting link and shoot me an email. We can talk about what I can do for your facility. Other than that, keep file integrity in place. Don't mess with your file names. Build that data validation in, and save yourself a boatload of money by making really good tools in Excel. Thank you very much.